Let's take a few minutes and go through the D-Show control surface. For those of you working in the analog world, don't sweat it. You're going to feel right at home here. For those of you working in the digital world, get ready for a whole new level of flexibility and sound quality. All right, let's go. Let's start at the input side of the console. The D-Show control surface offers 2 rows of digital encoders to give you access to a chosen set of parameters for the entire input section of the console. The choices for the function of the top row of encoders are made here. These choices include compressor threshold, gate threshold, high-pass filter, and delay. The encoder also doubles as an on-off switch by pressing down on it to engage the switch. While the switch light indicates the on-off status of the encoders, note that the 6-character display also indicates this parameter type as well. Skipping down to the next set of encoder status selectors, we can choose the function of the second row of encoders. The choices here are preamp gain, right offset, which is specific to stereo channels, pan, and finally width. Next, let's take a look at the final function set for the encoders, which is auxiliary levels for the inputs. Notice that the 2 sections offer identical choices for the auxiliaries. This is in order to offer access to more than one auxiliary bus at a time, or in the case of a stereo auxiliary, you can easily get to both level and pan simultaneously. Note again that in this mode, both sets of encoders act as a channel to auxiliary on-off switch. The last switch to note in this section is the yellow switch labeled Flip to Faders. This is a very handy mode in that it takes whatever is currently on the row of encoders you are targeting and flips them down to the faders. This is a wonderful feature for building auxiliary mixes via the faders, which can be much more visually intuitive. Any of the functions I've mentioned above can be flipped to the faders, including input parameters such as dynamics thresholds, filters, and even gain and pan. The final button on this branch is the source button, which toggles the 6-character display between the channel label and the actual input card address where the input is plugged in. This is an invaluable feature for troubleshooting. Let's move on to the channel strip. Starting at the top, your first item is the bank clip light. When this LED lights, it's an indication that input clipping is occurring on a layer other than the one you're currently monitoring. Next is the safe button. Depending on your preference settings, this switch can be either solo safe or snapshot safe. Next, we have a set of LEDs indicating group and output assignment. These double as VCA assignment indicators if the Show VCA member switch is activated. This switch is located just to the left of the master left-right output fader. If we hop over the first set of encoders, we have access to a set of switches and horizontally oriented meters. The first of which is the insert in and out switch. This switch refers only to the hardware insert, not the plugins. Plugins can be individually switched in or out at the ACS, which we'll address shortly. Next are comp limiter in and out and metering, gate in and out and metering, and the EQ in and out switch. Hopping over the second row of encoders, we come to the input meter. This is a 2-color meter that will turn every segment of the meter red if there is an input clip. Peak hold and ballistics for the meter can be determined in the options and interaction page of the D-Show software. At the very bottom of the meter is an LED to signify whether the channel is operating as a stereo channel. Just below the meter is the channel select switch, which selects the channel to the ACS, where you can get complete access to all parameters associated with the input. Below that is the solo switch, 6-character display, and the channel mute switch. Next, let's address the fader section. There are a couple of distinctions that have to be made between the main unit input faders and the sidecar input faders. The first being that the 16 input faders on the sidecar only function as input faders. However, on the D-Show mainframe, the 8 input faders serve triple duty. They can be 8 inputs shared across banks A, B, C, or D, or they can also serve as effects return 1 through 16 split across 2 banks. And finally, they operate as encoders for all of the integrated third octave equalizers with the filter sets spread across 4 banks of frequencies. Next, make note of the 4 buttons just to the left of the bank selectors. These are the global modifier buttons. They function as follows. The first button is the multi-select button. It is the keyboard equivalent of the Shift key. This allows you to select multiple channels at one time and edit numerous parameters on all of the selected channels at the same time. Next is the default button. This has a keyboard equivalent of the Alt key. This is used to reset given parameters on the console as well as plugins to a default status when engaged. Next is the Find button. This can be used to great effect when adjusting equalizers or levels where you want to do some high-resolution movement. This button can be latched on by double-clicking it. Finally, we have the User button, which has currently been set aside for future use. Next, we move to the ACS, or Assignable Channel section. If we select an input, we get immediate access to the following parameters for the targeted input: group and master output assignments. Input-specific parameters such as phantom power, 20 dB pad, polarity, right offset for stereo channels, preamp gain, delay, high-pass filter, and pan. Next are all of the given auxiliary on-off as well as level controls for the targeted input. Next, we have the EQ section, which can be toggled between a digital 4-band fully parametric or an analog emulated 2-band parametric with high and low shelving. These encoders can also double as encoders for the plug-in equalizers. Moving back to the top and right, we have an input direct switch which bypasses built-in dynamics, EQ, and inserts on the currently targeted channel. Next to it is the dynamics pre-EQ switch. This places the onboard dynamics before the onboard channel equalizer. Moving down, we see the hardware insert as well as plug-in bypass and select switches. Directly beneath those are the onboard dynamics in and out switches with respective metering as well as plug-ins bypass switch. There is also a select switch that allows manipulation of the onboard gate, compressor, or selected plug-in via the encoders above. Just to the right of those are the sidechain filter controls. Immediately below is the direct output level for the targeted channel. Directly below that is the ACS channel scroll. This allows you to select channels directly from the ACS without the need to go to the source channel to target it. Just to the left of channel scrolls are the software tab buttons. These take you directly to any master tab of the operating system. And finally, we have the snapshot recall section. Here you can scroll and select or store snapshots from D-Show. Let's move to the output section of D-Show. Here we see one row of multifunction encoders as well as one row of multifunction faders. The top row of encoders operate as auxiliary or group master levels as well as pan and group or aux to matrix send levels depending on the encoder selection switch. Moving down, we see the multifunction fader encoders. These can represent aux, PQ, matrix, groups, and VCA masters depending on the mode switch to the right of the faders. Moving right, we see the dedicated left, right, and center mono master fader. Moving upward, we come to the left, right, center mono, mute, select, and safe switches. Above that is the mute group master section. And above that, the headphone as well as external monitor, volume, and delay controls. Finally, on the far right top of the console, we see the assignable talkback section, user function section, and the solo PFL master controls. Well, that wraps up the flyby for the D-Show control surface. As you can see, you get a great deal of visual as well as tactile feedback. This is essential when creating a great mix in a live setting.